Hey guys, Zane here with another one-take review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Panic at the Disco album, Viva Las Vengeance. Viva Las Vengeance is the latest studio album from Panic at the Disco, who quite some time ago went from being a band to being a Brendon Urie solo project, but even with that being said, the Panic name has never fallen out of relevance since the outfit's heyday in the early 2000s that made them such massive icons. Their last effort, the utter musical failure that was Pray for the Wicked, had a string of singles that only cemented the name's place within the current musical landscape. They're now much more than just the I chimed in with a haven't you people ever heard of band. However, with the lack of actual attention or even hype that Viva Las Vengeance got when it was announced, things might be kind of turning around for Urie, and it's not really that hard to see why. One of Viva Las Vengeance's biggest flaws is that it relies too much on influences that simply cannot be recreated in any manner by a band like Panic at the Disco. It has been painfully obvious for some time now that Brendon Urie has wanted to make music that walks the line somewhere in between the anthemic indie rock of bands like The Strokes, as well as Queen's 80s output, less March of the Black Queen and more Hammer to Fall, but the issue there is that the quality of those particular acts, although the music itself is fantastic, is largely dependent on how talented and extraordinarily important for their time periods both The Strokes and Queen were. Then again, Brendon also compares himself and the Panic project to the new Dead Kennedys, and I think that kind of tells you just about how overconfident this record can be at times, but I digress. As I was saying before, those aforementioned catalogs that Urie really does take a lot of influence from and pull a lot of sound from, he doesn't seem to realize that those catalogs, their magic relies on the artists behind them instead of the actual music itself. The music itself is great, of course, but Panic at the Disco is a project with none of the passion or inventiveness or creativity as the vast majority of the artists that influenced it. Songs like Sugar Soaker want to be the musical equivalent to Sex, but they just don't have enough of the attitude to do so, and other cuts like God Killed Rock and Roll really do genuinely try for a sort of pure grandiosity about them, again, not too distant from the aforementioned Queen, but unfortunately they just don't have the guts to go all the way and take it to the limit. Let's face it, Viva Las Vengeance was always going to be a mediocre at best project from the start. I don't think anybody's really expecting Panic at the Disco of all projects to release something brilliant anytime soon, but Brendon Urie's refusal to do anything remotely unique or self-defined ultimately doesn't even allow this album to reach the threshold of slight remarkability. Viva Las Vengeance also tries to be quite theatrical overall, and as you might guess, this kind of just belly flops. However, it belly flops into a body of water that is so cringe-inducingly cold that there's no possible, conceivable way to save it from just sinking farther and farther down until it's completely lost with no hope. Something About Maggie is just an example of a cut that seems so obnoxiously jangly and over the top that even the biggest Dear Evan Hansen fans would spit on it and stomp it into the ground. Brendon Urie's enthusiasm for theater is very apparent on Viva Las Vengeance, and that is something that is easy to appreciate, but the lack of care and passion that is put into every other aspect of this record doesn't lend any favors to this particular side of the record, meaning that the theatrics that are presented here are ultimately impactless and, frankly, pointless. In fact, the musical influences here can actually be very obnoxious at times as they become so obvious that it's quite grating overall, and a good portion of the songs, at least on Viva Las Vengeance, could have been significantly better if they'd just been played straight without the theater influences that are being presented here. I'm not saying they'll be great songs, that's pretty unlikely, let's admit that, but still they would at least be mediocre and not just definitely bad. This is all just mixed together with some of the absolute worst songwriting of Brendon Urie's career so far, and that's pretty bad. However, his lacking in self-awareness but still biting lyricism of his earlier years in his career, as well as his more mindless and knowingly so mindless songwriting in his more recent years as a musician have been consistently acceptable. However, Viva Las Vengeance's lyricism seems to have an air about it that implies that it thinks it's doing something grand artistically, and Brendon Urie is absolutely not doing anything even close to grand artistically here. The overconfidence and the poignancy of the lyrics here is only overshadowed by the general poor songwriting on cuts like Middle of a Breakup that are almost bafflingly bad, even considering some of the worst moments of the previously established Panic at the Disco catalog. While Pray for the Wicked is still probably the worst album overall, in fact, it's probably the worst Panic at the Disco album, I do have to say that Viva Las Vengeance probably has some of the worst songwriting that Brendon Urie has ever delivered under his stint under the Panic at the Disco name. And again, considering he's not known as some sort of godlike wordsmith or anything like that, it's pretty bad. So overall, Viva Las Vengeance was never on anyone's tongue for Album of the Year contender or anything like that, but it's still also maybe a bit worse than you might expect. Then again, you might have expected nothing, because nobody even remotely talked about this album, that much at least. Even the Panic at the Disco fandom seemed pretty indifferent about the announcement of this record. I'm going to give this album 1.5 stars out of 5. My one take on this record is that Viva Las Vengeance may not be quite as bad as Pray for the Wicked, but its over-the-top theatrics that become obnoxious quickly, as well as a sense of underwhelming songwriting, ensure that the record can never reach a level of just pure decency, and that's frankly all I really ask for from an album like this. So again, 1.5 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.